Good morning everyone and welcome to today's EAUC webinar in association with Zero Waste Scotland and Professor Wouter Poortinga. The title of this webinar is Exploring the Disposable Cup Challenge and it will last approximately 1 hour. My name is Samantha Hartley. I'm the Scotland Programme Administrator here at the EAUC-Scotland. Just a little bit of housekeeping to go over now. I'm hoping that everyone can hear me well. I've muted you all to avoid background noise, and you will continue to be muted throughout the webinar. If you're having any technical issues at all, please let me know by either posting in the on-screen chat box, which is the bottom right of your screen, or sending me an email to scotland@eauc.org.uk. If you haven't already done so, please make sure your name is accurate by going into Participants at the bottom of the screen, hovering over your own name and clicking Rename. Because there will be 2 presentations followed by a Q&A, there is no need for your webcam to be on. Feel free to turn it off using the camera symbol bottom left of your screen. As I said, we will take questions using the chat box. If you have any questions during the webinar, please write them in there. Send them to the EAUC host, which is me, using the drop-down menu. I will take most of the questions after both presentations. If there is any specific clarifications, however, please pop them in the chat box and I'll ask them after our first presentation and we can move on after that. Please be as clear as you can in your questions. This webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded as a resource to our Sustainability Exchange with the presentations over the next few days. Please feel free to share these resources with any colleagues or fellow EAUC members. Once the webinar is finished, you'll be sent a short survey for us to gain your feedback. Please take a few minutes to complete this survey as the results will help us to improve our events. That's all from me now. Our first speaker is Michael Lenaghan from Zero Waste Scotland. Michael is a leading expert in life cycle analysis and the circular economy in Scotland. His work focuses on quantifying and communicating the opportunity of circular economy to policymakers, business leaders, and the public, both in Scotland and abroad. His initial encounter with the disposable cup problem was whilst working in a cafe for his undergraduate, and when starting with Zero Waste Scotland, he was part of implementing the carrier bag charge in Scotland. This inspired his use of life cycle analysis to quantify the impacts of disposable packaging and ways to encourage the reuse behaviour. Michael will now share his screen as I stop mine for his presentation.
All right, is that working, everyone? Can you see my presentation there?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Michael.
Great. Okay. Well, welcome everyone, and it's a pleasure to be speaking to you about disposable coffee cups, which is an area of that's become quite topical and one of particular interest to myself. So today I'm going to cover, let's see here. Yeah, there we go. So the presentation overview, I'm going to give a overview of the scale of the problem with a particular focus on Scotland, where Zero Waste Scotland is based. Then I'm going to talk about some of the challenges around managing disposable coffee cup, which I'll refer to as DCC waste, particularly recycling and the biodegradable cups and why those are proving a challenge. And then I'll conclude by reviewing some of the options around prevention via reuse, as in reusable cups. And then I'll be handing over to Professor Poortinga, who's going to talk a bit more about his the study that he's conducted around the charges, which will be the final point I cover. So first off, the problem. The material composition of disposable coffee cups is particularly problematic. By weight, they're between 15 and 20 grams per unit. And this means that they're a very lightweight but high volume product. And they have a particularly low value, both as a product and also ultimately as a waste resource. And this presents a problem when we start talking about options for how to recycle them or reintegrate them into the circular economy. looking at the material composition of a disposable coffee cup. And one of the tricky things is that no two are the same. The different retailers have distinct cups and distinct designs, but in general, they're made up of a high impact polystyrene lid, which is about 3 grams. This is a brittle plastic that quickly cracks when exposed to UV light. Then there's the sleeve, which is sometimes a separate piece of packaging or is integrated into the cup itself, and this is typically made of corrugated cardboard. Then there's the main body of the cup itself, which is made out of paper and is the majority of the weight of the cup. And then there's a tiny portion, which is the internal waterproof lining, which is made of polyethylene. And as we'll see later on, while this is the smallest by weight aspect of the cup, it has a very large impact on the recyclability or lack thereof of this material. So if we look at the disposable coffee cup by mass, it's somewhere between 15 and 20 grams. The units I gave previously is about a cup of about 18 grams. And the majority of the material is paper and cardboard, which makes up over 80% of the coffee cup. And that's the paper and the sleeve. However, if we look at the carbon impacts of producing a disposable coffee cup, we'll see that actually the majority of the emissions, just over half, are attributed to the plastic lid itself. And that's because plastic is a much higher carbon material, much more carbon intensive to produce, to manufacture. And so it accounts for the majority of the carbon impacts. And as a whole, the producing a disposable coffee cup generates about 1.5 times its weight in CO2. And most of this comes from plastic. So if we look at the total picture in Scotland, we don't have specific numbers for Scotland, but we do have a figure for the UK, which is about 2.5 billion coffee cups, disposable coffee cups, are consumed and wasted every year in the UK. So Scotland has about 8% of the UK population, and we don't envision that there'd be a significant difference in behavior between the UK general population and the Scottish population. So we use that as a proxy and estimate about 200 million disposable coffee cups are disposed of in Scotland every year. And based on an average weight of 18 grams, this gives us about 3,500 tons of disposable coffee cup waste every year. And using the carbon impacts of production, this winds up being about 5,500 tons of CO2 emissions. And it's important to keep in mind that as disposable coffee cups, every single one of these will eventually become waste and may become waste mere minutes after being purchased. And so the production emissions from disposable coffee cups is only part of the carbon impact story. To get the complete picture, we need to move on to how this waste is actually managed. And if we look back at the material composition of the coffee cup, the most important and influential part of the coffee cup is actually its smallest part. It's the internal waterproof lining, which is made from polyethylene. So this material is actually adhered to the inside of the coffee cup. And if you've ever tried to separate that lining from the coffee cup, and I would encourage people to give it a try. It's very difficult. It does not separate easily, and technically it's quite a challenge to get this very small piece of plastic off of what is the majority of the cup, the paper, in order to be able to recycle that paper back into pulp. So this is the first major barrier to recycling, which is that it is very difficult. The plastic itself can affect the recycling plant and machinery, and it makes it more expensive to recycle these cups. And pulp and paper recycling is an industry of margins, where something that requires extra cost is often not going to be focused on by recyclers. So that's our first technical barrier. It requires a special facility to recycle these cups. There's only 2 of them in the UK, and neither of them are in Scotland. There's also an economic barrier, which I kind of hinted at beforehand, which is that disposable coffee cups are high volume, low weight, low value, and they produce a low value recyclate. So it means the additional cost of recycling this packaging waste is not covered by the value of the product very well. And it means that transporting disposable coffee cup waste long distances quickly makes it uneconomical to do so. The insufficient supply in Scotland, basically 200 million cups a year sounds like a lot, but that's occurring all over the country. And to justify a plant, you would basically need to consolidate all of that coffee cup waste into one area, and that involves a lot of logistics and transport. And there's a reason there's only 2 of these plants in the whole of the UK. It's unlikely that we'll be able to justify building a plant in Scotland to treat this waste. So moving on, the vast majority of disposable coffee cups wind up in landfill or in incineration, basically in residual waste, simply because they cannot be recycled. So what this does is it adds an additional carbon impact to the life cycle of the coffee cups, and that's the waste management impact. And as you can see, that's about 7 additional grams per coffee cup, and most of that is coming from the paper, and that's because when a cup is placed into landfill under anaerobic conditions, eventually that organic material, the paper and the cardboard, breaks down and produces methane gas, which is a very powerful greenhouse gas that's 25 times more potent than carbon dioxide. The plastic becomes more of an issue if the cup is burnt in an incinerator, at which point essentially plastic is a fossil fuel derived material, and so it's akin to burning oil or gas. If you look at the total life cycle impacts of a disposable coffee cup, then it actually increases up to about 35 grams per cup, and 20% of that comes from the waste management impacts themselves. And what this means is that producing and ultimately managing the waste from a disposable coffee cup creates twice as much carbon impacts as the weight of the cup itself. And on a national scale, we estimate that the carbon impacts of disposable coffee cups in Scotland is about 7,000 tons of CO2 a year. Just to give you sort of a frame of reference, that's about burning 3,000 tons of coal, or 2% of the national carbon emissions of the country of Tonga, just for coffee cups, which is quite astounding. So there's also behavioral barriers, even if you get the technical barriers and the economic barriers out of the way. And these particularly come up when we look at one of the common alternatives, which to disposable coffee cups, conventional ones, which is biodegradable cups. And here we have a good idea in principle, which is not working in practice. And the first reason is in the name. They're often called biodegradable coffee cups, but what they really are compostable coffee cups. And compostable is a method of waste management, a method of organic waste treatment. And what that means is that ultimately for these cups to break down, they need to wind up in a compost facility specifically. And there's a number of things that can go wrong along the way between the consumer disposing of their cup and getting to the right place, the compost facility. And if anything goes wrong along that journey, they wind up in landfill where the same problem occurs. They break down under anaerobic conditions over time, producing methane gas and contributing to climate change. So there's 4 key points along the cup journey where something can go wrong. The first is consumer recognition. So does the consumer even recognize that the cup they're holding is a compostable cup? And if they do recognize it, do they care enough that they're going to seek out a compostable or biodegradable bin? So that's the first problem. The second problem is if the consumer does recognize it, if they care enough to try and find an organic bin, can they find one? You'll hear often that the major retailers will note they have bins available in their stores, but the very nature of a to-go coffee cup means people aren't drinking them in store. They're drinking them out on the street. They're drinking them as they walk around shopping or what have you. So you need compostable bins all over the place in order to catch these cups. And if they're not available, there's not so many consumers that are going to be willing to walk around until they find one. The next challenge comes with the waste contractor that's picking up this material. So once it's in an organic bin, the waste contractor picks it up, but they will take it to the facility they operate. And if they're operating an anaerobic digester, these cups cannot break down in that anaerobic digester, and in fact will mess up the process. So they will be removed. And I can tell you, having spoken with numerous companies, that they mean the best when they switch out conventional coffee cups with compostable coffee cups, thinking that they've done something good for the environment, and they mean well, but they haven't checked whether or not their waste contractor actually operates a compost facility. And time again, I've heard that in the end, these cups are going to an anaerobic digester and they cannot go into an anaerobic digester, so they're being pulled out and diverted to landfill. The last point is sort line recognition. So when organic waste or any waste is being treated, it generally goes through a sorting process, and this can be a manual sorting process, or it can be an optical or machine sorting process. If it's a machine sorting process, there's no way the machine is going to recognize the difference between a compostable and a non-compostable cup. So it will just remove these things. Even with a manual sort, it takes time and experience to recognize a compostable cup. They depend on different brands and the look of them. And so it's unlikely that they will pass a sorting line and wind up going into compost. They will more than likely be separated out as a prevention measure, just in case they are not compostable. So there's a lot that can go wrong on the way to the compost facility, and at any point that means diversion to landfill. So the bottom line is biodegradable cups can reduce the impacts of disposable coffee cups, but only under perfect conditions. So what is, of course, a better situation is waste prevention, and that's what we're going to focus on next. There's a quote here from Benjamin Franklin, and I'm sure he didn't come up with it thinking about coffee cups, but an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And that is very true in the case of waste, because when you prevent a waste from arising, you're preventing an entire life cycle from resource extraction to production, transport, retail, use, and eventual waste. When you recycle something, you're not preventing those life cycles, you're just reducing the impacts of those life cycles. So prevention is always superior to recycling. And in the case of disposable coffee cups, I would argue it's actually easier as well. So prevention via reuse, that is the use of reusable cups instead of disposable cups. It's interesting to note that at this point, nearly every major retailer offers a discount when you use a reusable cup. So basically, when you come in, you buy your coffee, and if you present a reusable cup, they will deduct some of the cost off of that drink for you. And Starbucks has had a discount in place for, I believe it's over a decade and longer, in fact, in North America. More recently, in fact, in the last year or two, in the face of growing public pressure and interest, Costa, Pret a Manger, and Cafe Nero have all come forward with similar discounts. And interestingly, they're all around the same value, although Cafe Nero offers a stamp system, but it has an indicative value of about 25p. And this is quite significant from an economic standpoint when you consider the value of a drink. It works out to be about a 10% price reduction on the price of a coffee, which is fairly significant. And with everyone offering one of these discounts, you could be forgiven for thinking that they actually work. But the fact of the matter is they do not appear to work. And we know this looking at industry accounts themselves. So to give an example, I think a great one comes from Starbucks, which publishes this information in its own CSR reporting. And in 2008, Starbucks introduced a reusable cup target of 25%. Basically, they wanted to sell 25% of all of their drinks in reusable cups, whether that be in-store ceramics or carry cups. And the goal of 25%, I think, is really shows how little they understood the challenge they were up against. And so they started selling reusable cups in store, and they provided customers with the reusable cup discount we just looked at. By 2011, however, the reusable cup rate had not moved. It was still below 2% where it had started. And the company did what many companies do when they set targets that turn out to be unrealistic, is they lowered their target. And in this case, significantly, from 25% to just 5%. After that period, they brought in the £1 reusable cup, so a significantly cheaper cup. And here in the UK, they actually trialed a 50p discount for bringing in your reusable cup. And again, from an economic standpoint, that is a really big discount. For one, it means you've paid for your £1 reusable cup with just 2 drinks. And then afterwards, you're actually saving considerable money. And yet, when 2015 came along and the end of the target, the reusable cup rate still remained below 2%, and Starbucks had simply failed to achieve its objective, even its revised objective. So that's the first indication that discounts are not working. But we also know discounts don't work from other industry stakeholders, and 2 of them spoke to the UK Parliament's Environmental Audit Committee on the 10th of October this year. And there's a transcript available online, and you can also watch the video. It's quite fascinating to follow the different arguments that are made in favor of recycling and so on, as opposed to some of the prevention measures we'll soon discuss. So I would encourage people who are interested to check that out. At any rate, the first quote here from Martin Kirsch of the Food Service Packaging Association says, "People are being offered up to as much as 50 pence, referring to the Starbucks discount, to use a reusable cup. And we do have an example of one group who not only gave the cup away for nothing, they also gave you free coffee the next time you brought it in. 3 weeks later, the ratio of reusables to regular paper coffee cups returned to the former pattern." In other words, discounts do not have a lasting impact, even when they're quite large. And then from Costa, which was talking about the discount that it had implemented within the last year, discounts are not necessarily driving the levels that you would hope to see. The take-up is low, below 1%. That is, less than 1% of the drinks they sell are in reusable cups. So if discounts aren't working, why are they so common? Why does everyone have them? Well, what are they actually intended to do? If the intention is to increase reusable cup sales or reusable cup rates, then no, they do not work. And that comes from the retailers themselves. However, these retailers are being faced with mounting public and political and media attention about disposable coffee cups. It's become a very hot issue, and they don't want to be seen to be doing nothing. So they've brought these discounts in, and what that signals to the public and to the policymakers is that they are trying to do something. So from an image side, discounts are an effective way to show your environmental commitment. And I think that is why we see them everywhere. It's not because they work to reduce disposable coffee cups, it's because they're seen to be doing something. So what does work? Well, I've done a bit of research now into reusable cup rates within major Scottish employers. These are companies or organizations that have in-house cafes or canteens where they supply or employees can obtain coffee in-house. And what I've found is that convenience is a really important factor affecting reuse rates. So if we look at the graph below, on the left-hand side, you can see Starbucks and Costa and their stated reusable cup rates of 2% and 1% respectively. On the right-hand side, you can see 5 different organizations where I've obtained data from. And what's important to note here is that, first off, in all but one case, the reusable cup rates are significantly higher than in the high street. Second is that these reusable cup rates appear to be higher irrespective of the value of the discount offered or the relative value of the discount offered compared to the drink that's being purchased. So it's not the discount, it's not the financial incentive that is affecting this higher reuse rate. What I am quite confident it is it's the convenience. It is simply easier to clean, to store, to use a reusable cup at work than it is in general when walking around the high street or going about your day. It's not like a plastic bag which can be shoved into a pocket or kept at the bottom of a bag. Reusable cups are generally much harder. They take up more space. They can be dirty and messy and generally inconvenient to carry around. So it is much more convenient to do this at a workplace. And that's a key point for employers or organizations looking to increase reusable cup rates, is to make reuse much more convenient, particularly in the case of hot desking, which is a fairly common practice now in office environments, providing your staff with a place to store their cup on site, so it's always around, but also it's theirs to use, is an important way to improve the reuse rate. But I think there's also probably an element of social capital and accountability that's at play there as well. You don't feel like the people around you when you walk into a Starbucks are going to care about whether or not you're using a reusable cup or not. But perhaps in your own workplace, there's an image there about wanting to appear to be sustainable or fit in with your peers who might also be using reusable cups. So that could also play a role. So how do we improve the convenience other than improving the facilities, so washing centers and storing facilities? Well, one option is a localized deposit return system. And this is a really interesting idea, I think, and one that could be used both within, on a university campus or within a large employer, but also in general in say, a downtown area. And the way it works is a customer, when they buy a coffee, have the opportunity to purchase or put a deposit down on a reusable coffee cup, which they can then take away from the store and go on their way. When they finish their coffee, they can either choose to keep that cup permanently or for as long as they want as their own personal reusable cup, or they can return it to a participating retailer. Now, this could just be within a chain, or it could be many participating retailers within the system, and they can return it there in order to recuperate their deposit. The cup is then cleaned and reintegrated back into the system for use by someone else. Essentially, it's just like any other cup in a restaurant or whatever. The customer uses it, it gets washed and then put back. The key is the deposit is there to design or to encourage that cup to come back into the system and not walk off unless the consumer wants to use it for themselves. So the benefits of this system are that the consumers get all the convenience of a disposable coffee cup without any of the environmental impacts. They get to take their cup, walk off, go and do their shopping or go and do their travel or whatever it is, and then return it to a participating retailer within the region that's participating within the local deposit return system. The other nice benefit of it is that it actually reduces the total amount of reusable cups you need. It's kind of a sharing economy principle that you don't need a reusable cup all the time because you're only using it once or twice a day. So one cup could really be used by many people over the course of a day, provided it's washed and so on. So you actually need fewer reusable cups to service a larger number of people. So are there real world examples of this? Yeah, in fact, one of them, the one most people are probably familiar with, is the UK Christmas markets. When you go to these markets, you can obtain a glass of mulled wine and you pay a deposit on the cup. And then you can carry that cup all around the market with you. You can get it refilled as you like. You can walk off and take it as a souvenir. But when you return it to the vendor, you get your money back. So that system's been going on for years and works very well. Specific to coffee cups, the city of Hamburg in 2016 launched its Refill It system, which is like the one I've just described, and featured 11 participating retailers. And the interesting thing here is that the participants or customers could buy their own lid and hold on to their own lid and then just pick up a reusable actual cup whenever they purchase coffee. And that was basically designed so that for the hygienic, the concerns of hygiene, that you could basically always be using your own lid, but the rest of the cup is part of the deposit system, and the whole thing is reusable. The lid is reusable, and the cups are reusable. Very recently, this company, this UK startup called Cup Club, just won a $2 million circular economy design grant from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and their business model is a subscription one where people can pay into a subscription service and then obtain access to a localized reusable cup deposit system, which I believe is operating at the moment in an area of London, but they've got plans with their new cash to expand that elsewhere in the UK to major cities. So another interesting example. So that's the deposit return scheme is a fairly big change to the current system. Effective from what we know from the examples, but it is a big change. A much easier change, a much more simple change, is simply replacing the current discount system with a charging system. That is a charge for disposable coffee cups. And what lies behind this? Well, the first thing is packaging is not free. We all pay for packaging, but the cost is simply hidden from view. It's bundled into the cost of the product you're actually wanting to buy. And in some cases, the cost of packaging can be very significant. If you think about, for example, a jar of pickles, the 10 pickles in that jar are not very expensive to produce, to manufacture, to grow, and so on. The jar itself is probably the most costly item in that package that you're buying. So studies have shown, including some work I've done as well, that about 7% of your average grocery bill is actually covering the cost of the packaging. And most of this packaging is single-use packaging, which is discarded as waste immediately after the product has been consumed. What packaging charges and discounts do is make the cost of that packaging explicit. So it sends a clear signal to the consumer, and it notifies the consumer, this packaging is a product in and of itself, and it has value. Now, the reason charges tend to work better than discounts in general is that they utilize what's known as loss aversion. And basically, loss aversion is this idea from behavioral science that people will do more to avoid loss than they will to obtain a gain. So people will adopt more behavioral change, or are more willing to change their behavior in order to avoid a financial loss than they are to obtain that same value in financial gain. So a great example of where a charge is in place is the Scotland's 5p carrier bag charge, which I understand is rolled out across the UK. And it's interesting to note that this is a very minor charge. 5p is, on an economic scale, is very minor. And yet, in its first year of operations, it reduced single-use carrier bag use in Scotland by 80%. Now just think, would the result have been the same if instead shoppers were offered a 5p discount on their grocery bill for each reusable bag they used? Probably not. I don't think anyone would find a 5p discount worth their time. So it's about presentation more than it is about value, and it's been very effective. So the beauty of the charging system is that they are a simple way to change consumer behavior without raising costs. And as we already saw, all of the major retailers already have a disposable coffee, a reusable cup discount in place. So all we need to do is replace that with the same value in charge. And as you can see under the two scenarios here, whether the drink is served in a disposable coffee cup or served in a reusable cup, the price is the same under a discount or a charging system. So this was pointed out at the Environmental Audit Committee by the chair when asking the industry what they thought about a charge, and she said, "This is an inverse tax already, is there not? If you're prepared to give a 25 pence discount, that's effectively already a charge." And that's absolutely true. It's just about the way it's perceived. So just speeding along, a couple more slides. I know I'm running out of time here, apologies. So charging for disposable coffee cups, it's clear that the public and policymakers are interested in this approach. In September 2017, the Scottish Government announced in its programme for government that it would be establishing an advisory group to look into the possibility of a charge on single-use cups. In October, a YouGov survey commissioned by Marine Conservation Society found, quote, 74% of Brits would support a charge on single-use cups. And that same month, the UK Parliament's Environmental Audit Committee held oral evidence to look at this issue exclusively. At the same time, it's very clear that the packaging industry strongly opposes a disposable coffee cup charge, and I'll let them express that argument in their own words. The first is that they argue we should be focusing on reducing litter rather than prevention. And here's a quote from an article in Packaging News. "Charges will not address litter problems. The necessary transformation in consumer behavior in relation to litter will require investment in national behavior change-led programs." Similarly, in that same article from the Food Service Packaging Association, a charge on cups will not in any way change the behavior of those who feel it is acceptable to litter. And I mean, a prevention measure will reduce the amount of waste, and therefore it seems reasonable that it would affect litter. But putting that aside, the two are not mutually exclusive. Prevention and litter are two different approaches that can go on at the same time. The same is true for the second argument, which is we should focus on recycling rather than prevention. The focus should be on building on the good work that has been implemented to recover and recycle coffee cups from the Food Service Packaging Association. And we are not, as an industry, in favor of bans or charges. What we want to do is put the infrastructure and the points into place so that people can recycle the product. Again, recycling is not mutually exclusive from prevention. And moreover, we know that prevention is an improved, is superior to recycling. But I think what both of these arguments point out is that the food or the packaging industry is in favor of quote unquote solutions that do not actually reduce disposable coffee cup use, but rather just change the way that that waste is managed. And that really comes out in the third argument, which is reducing disposable coffee cup waste would be bad for the economy. And here's the quote, "The focus should not be on reducing demand for an industry that makes a positive contribution to the economy." And this is a really interesting argument because what it's effectively saying is preventing waste reduces economic activity, and conversely, encouraging waste stimulates the economy. And you can imagine how that might sound if you applied it to, say, energy efficiency or food waste. We should encourage inefficient cars or appliances because using more energy means more money in the economy. Or we should encourage consumers to waste food because they're ultimately stimulating the food and drink and agricultural sectors. It doesn't really stack up. So in conclusion, Scotland generates 2 million coffee cups a year. These are difficult to recycle due to their material composition. Preventing disposable coffee cups through reuse is the best way to reduce their environmental impacts. Reusable cup discounts are common but ineffective as an incentive. They are used to communicate environmental commitment. What works is making reusable cups more convenient, replacing reusable discounts with charges, and the public seems to support the latter option, but the packaging industry does not. So I'll conclude there and hand over to Professor Poortinga, who's going to talk about his own field study into charges. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. That was great. If anyone does have any questions, please post them in the chat box and we'll try to get through them at the end. If not, we'll take a list of them and send out the answers afterwards. So we have next, Professor Poortinga, and he's going to present on obviously a similar topic. Wouter is the Professor of Environmental Psychology at the School of Psychology and Welsh School of Architecture of Cardiff University. Wouter's research covers the social and behavioural aspects of sustainability and includes topics such as climate change perceptions, household energy use, and behaviour change interventions. Wouter's first interest in the coffee cup problem was triggered by his research into plastic carrier bag charges that Michael's just mentioned there. Michael will now share his screen. No, sorry, Wouter will now share his screen. Hi, Wouter, I've just unmuted you there.
Yeah, so does it work?
Yeah, we can see that's good.
Yep. Okay, thanks very much, Michael, for this very good overview of the coffee cup problem. And there's a number of things that I will be referring to as well in this presentation. But what I'd like to do here is to present the results of a experiment we conducted about a year ago together with Beuys Tea and Coffee Company and a number of universities. And this is much more a pragmatic, practical kind of study to see how we can reduce coffee cup waste. Now, as Michael already said, so we use an awful lot of coffee cups, and there's always this number of 2.5 billion cups that is bandied about. So although that one cannot really be verified, so it's all over the place. But I've tried to find out where it comes from, but I can't really find it. But the first one that I saw it quoted is the PCCG, also mentioned by Michael in his presentation. The problem is that very few of them are being recycled, so the numbers is fewer than about 1%. And as Michael already mentioned, this is due to the PE lining. And whilst it's technically possible to recycle that, you need to get it into the right waste stream, and that is a enormous challenge. So most coffee cups end up in landfill or as litter. And also what I think is relevant is that, the disposable coffee cup has become a symbol of the on-the-go disposable consumption culture that we've ended up with. Well, if you're looking at the coffee cup problem, actually not many people are aware of the problem. And also, disposable coffee cups are often referred to as paper cups. And I had a discussion with a colleague here yesterday, and he said, well, they're paper. So that's environmentally friendly, isn't it? But of course, they are not because of the lining. And this issue was highlighted by Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall a couple of years ago with his War on Waste campaign. And since then, it has been continuously in the news. And this program by Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall was the reason for Beuys Coffee and Tea Company, so who commissioned this study is to see what they could do themselves. Now, I have to do a little bit of promotion here because the study was organized by Beuys, and they are a typical coffee and tea company. They try to sell lots of that to their clients. But they are trying to get a bit also as the other ones, I presume, by things like trying to look at cup solutions, as they call it, offering branded china, crockery, branded keep cups, things like that. But of course, they will also supply disposable coffee cups, and they do to almost all of their clients. But based on this study or the program by Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall, they wanted to do a study to see if there's other ways to increase reusable cup usage. So they contacted me at Cardiff University, partly because I've done this work on the Welsh and the English plastic bag charge, and they want to see if those principles could also be used with a coffee cup. So, we sat together and then tried to design a study in which we could test that. Now, here it was important that we had easily implementable measures that any coffee shop could take to increase reusable cup usage. And if you're looking at coffee shops like Costa and Starbucks, they're having discounts. They're also having reusable cups for sale for not too much money. But here we looked at a whole list. So we're looking at environmental messaging, the sale of reusable coffee cups for cost price, the distribution of free coffee cups to customers, And then also we wanted to make a comparison between a discount and a charge. And as already mentioned by Michael, they are effectively the same thing. So if you reduce the price of the coffee and then charge for the disposable cups, then it's effectively the same as a discount for bringing your own cup. Now, Beuys did a lot of the work, so they recruited the 12 sites for the study, so they had the contacts. Took a little bit of time, but we ended up with 8 university sites at the University of South Wales, Imperial College, Cardiff University, and the University of Winchester, and also with Bartlett Mitchell, who cater for different companies. Now, the sites had different combination of measures. Was slightly different than we thought out, because we had to work with those sites, and we were also dependent on what those sites were willing to do. And at the beginning, it was actually quite difficult to find a site that was willing to charge for disposable coffee cups. But in the end, the University of Winchester was willing to do that. So different sites displayed posters, show cards. A few sites, they offered reusable cups at about cost price, so £6–7. 4 sites, they received 200 reusable coffee cups from Beuys to give to their customers, and then a number had a discount and 1 site had a charge. Now, the study was a typical before and after intervention study, so we asked the sites to record their daily sales of hot drinks for 10 weeks, and that was 5 weeks before, so 5 weeks before we did anything, and then 5 weeks after, so typically 50 days in total, although a few of them were also open in weekends, and they were also included. Now, in terms of the analysis, there's a whole, a number of words together, so multi-level interrupted time series regression analysis. I won't explain what it is, but I'm more than happy to share the details with you if you're interested. And then what we were looking at is the daily proportion of reusable cups, as the dependent variable. Now, these were the 12 sites. You can see that all of them had posters. So in the first 5 weeks, nothing happened, and then they all received the posters. Then 8 sites had reusable cups for sale at cost price. 4 sites, where we distributed free cups, or they could decide themselves who they distributed to the customers, and then we either had a charge or a discount or nothing at all. Now, here you can see the results. So at site number 1, that one was actually one of the more effective one. You can see that was the charge. This was at the University of Winchester, and there was an increase from 5 to 17%. The next one, site number 2, that wasn't too bad either, from about 2 to 12.5%. That was a business site. And the other ones are actually slightly less impressive. So, you have an increase from 5 to 6, or from, a half to 1, and things like that. Site number 8 is actually one of the better ones. And interestingly, we only had messages here and reusable coffee cups for sale. But it is on the average, and that is why we did the regression analysis. Now, what we did find is that all of the different measures were to some extent effective. Yeah, so whether it was a financial incentive, reusable alternatives, or clear messaging, they all increased reusable cups sales. So if you're looking at messaging, so if you're looking at from before and after, that in itself could increase reusable cup usage by about 2.5%. That doesn't sound much, but this is basically what you could specifically attribute to messaging, right? Then the next one, availability of reusable cups, is an increase of 2.5%. And then when you provide reusable cups for free, that was one of the more effective ones, so 4.5%. And then a charge a further 3.5%. Now, it is important to note that while the increases for these individual measures are relatively small, these effects are additive. right? So if you have messaging, which all of them have, if you provide reusable cups or you provide them for free and then have a charge, you can effectively add them all up. Yeah, so on the base of that, you could increase reusable coffee cup usage by about 2.5 to 12.5%. And also, if you're looking at a previous slide, the greatest behavioral change was found when you combine a few of those measures together. Now, what can we conclude on the basis of this? Well, with a combination of measures, you can increase the use of reusable coffee cups by about 12.5%, which is modest but quite substantial, I would say. And if you then roll this out across the UK, you could save between 50 and 300 million, coffee cups, disposable coffee cups, right? Although here it is important to note that there's a difference between on-site cafes and, let's say, coffee shops in the high street. So it could be more effective in-house than on the street. Also importantly, and this fits nicely with what Michael said before, we found that a charge in disposable cups did increase the use of reusable cups, but a discount on reusable cups didn't have an impact at all. So there was one side where it did work, but with the others, it had no effect whatsoever. Now that was the story, well, the end of the story of this particular study. But then for the House of Commons Environmental Audit Committee investigation on coffee cups, I contacted the University of Winchester to find out if they were happy for me to name them. And then they told me that they actually continued with its trial and the recording of sales. And then because it was so effective, they rolled it out across the 3 cafes. Now, before the trial, the university used around 200,000 disposable coffee cups over the academic year, yeah, which is perhaps not an awful lot, but the University of Winchester is a relatively small institution. But they had made a number of efforts to reduce disposable cups, but they were not really successful. So they increased it with a few percentage points, but nothing more than that. And that was one of the reasons why they were quite keen to take part in the study and also to trial a charge. And the other sides, as I mentioned before, were quite reluctant to do so. So during this study, they increased it to 17.5%, but then they continued it. And here you can see the results of that. So from November to February 2017, they increased it even further to about 18 to 27%, which is actually quite substantial. So, about a quarter is now with crockery or with reusable coffee cups. Now then in February, what they did is that they gave away 2,500 cups to their students and staff. Yeah, so 2,500. So I don't know how many it is of their all staff or the students, but it's quite substantial. And there you can see they increase it even further to up to 43%. Now there could be a difference between students and staff, so they were also interested whether this would drop back after the academic year. So after the students went home after the exams in May. But as you can see, it kept up quite nicely with only a small drop at cafe number 1. And cafe number 1 was the one that took part in the original study of about a year ago. Now, we constructed a press release on the basis of this result, and you may have seen some of these. So it was a relatively small study, but the attention from the media was absolutely amazing. So it really exploded on the day, and we conducted an enormous number of interviews on this topic. So here you can see the BBC, the Guardian, Huffington Post, the Times, etc. So it is really a hot topic, and I think it's focused the attention on the problem as well, and to end up with there was also the House of Commons Environmental Audit Committee with their inquiry into plastic bottles and coffee cups waste, and we shared this information, this evidence with them as well. And hope that it will have some impact as well. Now, that's it for now. What I would like to finish with is that, I didn't receive any financial payment or any other benefits from Beuys. So, I really thought it was a study that needed to be done. So seeing if we could reduce coffee cup waste. And as I said, it was a relatively small study, but I think quite effective. What I think is important is that with institutional commitment, as the University of Winchester has shown, you can actually make a difference. So you can reduce coffee cup wastage by about 40% in relative terms. So I think that is worth a try. So thanks very much. That's it for me today.
Thank you very much, Wouter, for your presentation. We've got a good few questions in as well whilst we were going through that. I've got these questions just here. So what I'll do is I'll try to get through a couple of them. But if you want to write any questions at all you have in the chat box, I will send around a document following the webinar with the answers in that we didn't get to. So make sure to post those in there and we'll email them over to you. Just a note as well, we'll also be emailing the presentations and any links. So this transcript from the UK Parliament session that Michael spoke about as well. I've got a question just now for, well, either of you really. It's from Craig Anderson, and the question is, how effective is branding in reusable cups and social signalling? So I'm not sure if either of you has had any experience with the actual branding of the actual the keep cups or reusable cups.
I haven't looked into that particularly, although I would say that from my my experience working with the different organizations, that people appreciate the opportunity to just differentiate the cup that they have from others. So I think where you can kind of express yourself through consumption, basically, like express yourself with the cup you have. So rather than, say, handing out 1,000 of the exact same cups to everyone, if you were to encourage people or maybe even incentivize people to get the cup that they want, they'll be more attached to that cup and sort of feel that it speaks a bit about them.
That's great, thank you, Michael. Any thoughts on that, Wouter?
I have to say I haven't really thought about this, so I have nothing to add at this stage.
No problem at all, thank you. We have time for a couple more questions. We have a question from Kate Cathy. It's just with your insight into the high street coffee shops, Michael. Did you note that the high street, any of them, had reduced the prices for drinking in store, similar to coming with a reusable cup, so 25p off drinking in store rather than taking away a single-use cup?
Well, I mean, yes, the price is reduced in the same way it would be if you showed up with your reusable cup. If you use a in-store ceramic cup, you also get the discount. So it's about a 10% savings, just as it would be if you came in with your own reusable cup.
That's great, thank you. And we've had also a lot of interest in the, from your diagram, the business or organization that achieved an 81% reduction. Is this a general, that people kind of want to know what kind of business that was or institution and how they achieved that?
So I don't recall off the top of my head all the measures they put in place, but I know that they were very committed to this issue and had thought a lot about it. As I recall, there was a discounted reusable cup that was available for staff to purchase. But I can't say that I remember all the different measures they put in place, but it wasn't, it was a committed effort. And moreover, in terms of the organization, it was a environmentally related organization of significant size, I should add. but not like a policy or environment like that sense, but certainly engaged in a sort of wide range of environmentally related issues. So they have a staff that's in tune, I think, more so than the average person. So that probably helped as well. And as I say, with the social capital element, if you're surrounded by people who are environmentally engaged, there's a bit of encouragement or inducement to be so as well, and to walk the walk. So
yeah, that's great. Thank you. And I've got just one last question for Wouter. From your project, have you done any follow-up on kind of, other than the years you had in that diagram, or any kind of analysis of creating a culture around reuse and how that can go from just beyond the initial kind of getting it off the ground until it becomes the norm in certain institutions?
Yeah, so we haven't done a follow-up to this study yet, but we are working on it. So we're trying to get funding to do something more substantial. But what I would like to add here, so I can see a question by Craig Anderson, but also as a follow-up what Michael said before, that you do need institutional commitment to get the reduction. So 12.5% is indeed very small compared to the 81% in organization one that Michael showed in his presentation. But this was a relatively, let's say, small experiment. Let's say to have a concept of proof if this could work. But as shown by the example of the University of Winchester, is that when you make effort to make a real change, you can get it up to quite substantial numbers.
Okay, that's perfect. Thank you very much. We've just gone a little bit over there, so I'm just going to close for now. If anyone has any last minute questions, please pop them in the chat box and I will make the document to circulate later by email. As I say, along with the presentations and the recording of this webinar as well. And please share that with any relevant colleagues who you think the learning will be beneficial. Please remember to also complete the feedback survey, and a huge thank you to Professor Poortinga and Michael Lenaghan from EAUC-Scotland for your input today, and to you all for tuning in and asking questions as well. And thanks again for joining us.